Alright, boys and girls, this video is a continuation of the most fearsome, dangerous, most deadly Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition monsters broken down for every single challenge rating, aka their CR, that I did a few weeks ago. If you haven't checked out that video, go watch it. It's pretty good. Again, to reiterate, the point of this video is to look at all of the monster stat blocks broken down for each level so you can practice recognizing red flags for your monsters and get a better understanding of how to balance your encounters in a fun way without serving up a lame boss or wiping your players all out if a few rolls go badly for them. Much like the first video, I will be counting any and all published monsters as fair game, excluding named characters or monsters akin to named characters like the Mad Golem from Dungeon of the Mad Mage, because frankly, the designers changed these stat blocks without changing their CR, and it would kind of defeat the whole point of the video. I have painstakingly combed over every freaking monster ever published by Wizards of the Coast for 5e that was not obviously a named character, now from CR 1/8 all the way to CR 21 for your entertainment and education. Needless to say, you can consider my conclusions conclusive. Let's begin! Picking up where we left off at CR 9, we have one of the three toughest levels to judge for this grouping, CR 9 to CR 21. I mean, there were 5 monsters ultimately that I thought, wow, they're all miles better than the rest of the CR 9s, and you could argue that each one is the deadliest, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. The bottom line, I could kill a group of players, I think, with any of these monsters. First, there is the 200 hit point on average Cloud Giant. 200 hit points is a metric ton for CR9, and it hits like a truck. But the reason this stat block is so deadly is because it Misty Steps and has an intelligence of 12. If you're throwing a pair of CR9s together for a CR11 encounter, 400 hit points and a plus 12 to hit at a whopping 3d8 plus 8 a pop will drop the backcasters like a sack of potatoes. Cleaning up the Barbarian or Paladin from that point should be pretty easy. Meanwhile, the Frost Giant Zombie is squishier at 138 hit points, but it hits even harder, and it carries a 10-foot DC 17 con save aura that'll lock down players from extra attack and bonus actions, or it'll straight up paralyze someone, then attack them at advantage on 3d 12 plus 6 fishing for crits. A level 7 party up against one of these as a deadly encounter will probably cost your group a party member or two. Then you have the Hydroloth and the Flynn, who will both shenanigans the party with madness and an infinite invisibility into a steel memory intelligence save. And then finally at CR 9, we have the single best caster list in the entire game with the Abjure. I mean it. I'm not exaggerating. The Abjure has the best spell list, and it isn't even close. Let's see. Message, Mending, Mage Armor, Magic Missile, Invisibility, Counterspell, Dispel Magic, Fireball, Banishment, Cone of Cold, Wall of Force, Flesh to Stone, Globe of Invulnerability, Teleport, and every time they cast an Abjuration spell, they pick up another 30 hit points. So it kind of feels like the more damage they do and the more engaged they are, the more they heal themselves. I mean, seriously, if you said, hey, I'm playing my first wizard, what spells should I take, Cody? I would just tell you to copy the Abjure. CR 15 Strahd von Zarovich wishes he had a spell list this good. It's incredible. So, with all that said, who is the baddest of them all? Give me the Cloud Giant 1, just because of its health, and the Flynn 2nd, because that flail is gnarly, and the Abjure 3rd, only 3rd, because it's a squishy caster after all. CR 10 was a little tough itself, but the more I studied, the more the winner became clear to me, and at a bit of a shock too. I do want to point out that this CR, along with CR 9, feels the most inflated compared with other levels in my opinion. There's a big step up from CR 7s and 8s, and not that much of a difference between CRs 11 and 12. So keep an eye out with balance with any of the mentioned monsters in these two levels, guys, especially if you start adding in additional action economy to your combats. Immediately, I thought, well, of course, it'll either be the Alhun or the Aboleth. Both of these monsters are incredibly dangerous, and the Aboleth is one of the few monsters in the game that can take on an entire party as a single monster. But, as it turns out, the strongest monster at CR 10 is the Elder Obelix. The kit here is just nasty. What really sets this thing apart, and something that should be a red flag for you, is that it can eat memories every single turn. Additionally, the implied ambush tactics pretending to be an NPC is too easy for a Dungeon Master to end up killing the party. The only downside it has is fire, but it casts Charm Person at will as a 5th level spell, aka it can charm the entire party from its fake damsel in distress form while occupying a separate space up to 120 feet away. Throw in Dominate Person, Hold Person, which is at will, by the way, yes. You heard that right. Confusion, Dimension Door, 22 intelligence, and the ability to move through a 1-inch space without even squeezing. And you have basically maybe the best Predator in all of Dungeons and Dragons. Next up, we have the CR11s, who were surprisingly mediocre, if I'm being honest. And the choices were pretty obvious once I dug in. Coming in as runners up, we have 2 nasty swallower monsters with too many legs in the Bahir and the Remores. Now, I've talked about the Remores on the channel before, and at a beefy 195 hit points on average, this thing is deadly to lower level parties as a boss type, but ultimately, as it lacks multi-attack, it cannot be crowned champion of the 11s, and I mean, if it had multi-attack, it would easily be a CR14 for context. The Bahir, on the other hand, is outright deadly, with a bit of everything. Good hit points, an action economy denying constrict, a rechargeable lightning breath, along with the aforementioned swallow, which honestly could be considered the strongest of the 11s. But I'm gonna make maybe a controversial pick here and go with the Soulmonger from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Much squishier than the other two, no doubt. But this is a monster that I could more easily envision wiping out a party member or two, especially when doubled up. Yes, I know that seems like cheating, but I think the context of how a Dungeon Master will use a monster should matter as much in the rankings as it will in the game. And again, that's the whole point of this video, keeping an eye out for those red flags. Red flags for DMs with the Soulmongers is first and foremost the fact that it's basically just an elf, which will lead a few DMs to pick up the humanoids and drop them in as a quick reskin because they're humanoids. Even the most experienced players won't have a clue as to just how strong they are until initiative has already been rolled. What immediately stood out to me is their AoE cone, Wave of Weariness, that recharges 50% of the time. There's nothing subjective here. It's simply better than the Bahir's line attack. It deals psychic, so it'll eat through raging barbarians who are unprepared, and it deals exhaustion levels, while their dagger attacks give disadvantage to melee types on top of that. The bottom line is a DM who throws 2 of these at a level 10 to 13 party could see their campaign end a lot quicker than with the 2 Bahirs or 2 Remoreses. Thus, the Soulmonger takes the win here. Now, CR12 is all about Dungeon Master strategy. If you're a Dungeon Master who plays every NPC as hard as they can while cheesing it like a 20-year-old camping the power sword at the top of Lockout, shout out to Halo fans, then these monsters might shift around a bit in rankings. Our honorable mentions are the Firemane Angel with a solid flyby attack, and the monster that almost pulled it off, the Yuan-Ti Anathema with its potent Ophidiophobia aura. Ultimately, the deadliest monster for CR12 had to be the Aeorian Nullifier because of its counterspell, which it gets at will, a once per day anti-magic field spell, and the ability to nullify, get it, any attackers they get too close. The Nullifier is hands down the winner as we continue to get just a little bit more power creep from Wildmount. Sorry, it's the truth. And so we have reached the easiest choice for deadliest monsters for a CR in all of my hours of combing over stat blocks, as the infamous Beholder is by far and away the deadliest party wiping monster for CR 13. Here's the deal. There's not a lot to say about the Beholder because experienced DMs know why it is so deadly. And if you're a newer DM wondering why, I'd recommend you go read the stat block and study it a bit. It's a great monster and a good lesson in game design, in my opinion. I'll throw a link down below. But that doesn't tell the whole story. So let's look briefly at the runner-ups. First, we have the Atropole, and this again is a cheese monster. If you want to kill your party, fly up into the air and have it wail over and over and over again until the party becomes exhausted and dies. That's pretty strong. And may I say that with an intelligence score of 25, yes, you heard that right, I'd argue that any DM that wanted to do that should be able to do that without getting accused of cheating. And then we have one of my absolutely favorite monsters of all time ever, the Neothelid, which is basically a giant worm with psychic powers and acid breath. Oh, and did I mention it has 325 average hit points? Which, might I add, at just CR 13, that's higher than any other monster in this entire video, and we're going all the way up to CR 21. Oh, and it has an at-will levitate, which can be used offensively. We've talked about that before on the channel. Now, I mean, it's not as deadly as the Beholder, but it can make for a dangerous fight as a big monster for lower level parties. With a coin flip on an opening confusion spell, it might wipe out a higher level party just out of pure dice bad luck, but without multi-attack, it just doesn't have the umph of the other two. CR 14 was probably my overall favorite group of monsters. Look, I'm gonna give it away here. It's the Death Tyrant, aka the Undead Beholder, not to be confused with the CR 5 Zombie Beholder. That's the deadliest monster at 14. I know, shocking, but there are times when it will fire 3 to 5 disintegration rays in a round, and that has to be respected. And that's not even counting Death Ray or Petrification Ray. It's a party wiping machine every bit as much as the standard Beholder, and not giving it the top spot here because I already gave the Beholder the top spot at the last level for CRs would be disingenuous. Now, for runner-ups, we have the Cadaver Collector, another monster that I've talked about before on the channel with its paralyzing breath and Summon Spectre's ability. Oh, and let me just add, because I got like 50 comments, so many that I had to stop replying to them about how the Cadaver Collector only gets 1d6 Spectres, to which I'd say, read the stat block again, boys and girls. You might argue rules as intended, but rules as they are written in ink in Mordecaius Tomophos on page 122 says, and I quote, "They disappear when the Cadaver Collector is destroyed." That doesn't say at the end of an hour, at the end of the day, or in 10 minutes, or even when the Cadaver Collector recharges his ability to summon more. It says they disappear when the Cadaver Collector is destroyed, period. So yes, if the Collector continues to grow their collection and continues to summon specters, they could have 400, 500, 10,000 specters following them around. Also, we have the Archon of the Triumvirate from Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica that deserves a shout out as well for its super cool rejoin mount legendary action alone. Also, it hits like a truck when and if it knocks someone down, not anywhere close to the Death Tyrant, but still a pretty neat CR 14 that I personally enjoyed reading about in my studies, and one that has enough red flags that you should probably look at some of those things that it does when it knocks someone prone. And now it's time to have a chat about CR 15. Look, I'm just gonna say it. Strahd von Zarovich included. Vampires are weak as hell. They should be CR 11s, not 15. Both the Warrior and the Spellcaster stat block are way overhyped. There's a reason when you ask a fellow Dungeon Master, how did their Curse of Strahd game, how did that go? They all say the same thing. Well, the players had no problem with Strahd. Now that that's out of the way, and I'm clearly not going to get any comments arguing with me about my analysis here, let's talk about the two strongest CR15s, the Adult Sapphire Dragon and the Typhon from the Mythic Odysseys of Theros, which I don't know why it's so hard for me to say that out loud. I mean, I nailed Ophidiophobia earlier, but I can't say Mythic Odysseys of Theros. Anyways, the dragon has an absolutely incredible ability in Teleport, which they can do as legendary actions to reposition for their breath weapon, which, by the way, incapacitates. Additionally, DMs who enjoy playing intelligent monsters will enjoy this with 18 intelligence, the ability to tunnel, and I think the most important ability, scrying once a day. So the dragon could absolutely know exactly how to target the PCs should they make an enemy of the dragon. And dare I say, if you're playing the dragon as ruthless as you can and probably should, scrying would help it determine when to strike, as it would certainly be intelligent enough to wait for the PCs to doff their armor and go to sleep. Then the Typhon, which has troll-like regenerative properties, except that the players have to hit it with a far less common damage type than fire, hits like a truck, and unless the players already know what that damage type is that they need to kill it off permanently, it'll just keep standing up and hitting like said truck. I'm obviously not disclosing that damage type for spoilers for any of you players out there trying to be sneaky little cheats. For this level, I am giving the nod to the Typhon, because I feel like it can just stand up against a caster-heavy party a little bit better than the dragon maybe could. Okay, Before we move on to CR16, I want to make a comment about the rest of the monsters as we move up in challenge ratings. By the time we get to CR16, we don't have many more common monsters at this point. While we do have a few choices spread throughout the 20 or so books by now, more often than not, they are uniquely named monsters and thus would and should be excluded from the list according to the guidelines that I've given myself. Here's the slight problem. I wanted to just start including the named monsters, but again, man, the game designers often just added abilities to a monster or clearly reskinned them and then added. So the balance of being a true CR16 or a CR20, etc. is really just all over the place, and that defeats the point of the exercise of studying the monsters and looking for red flags. So if you really want to challenge your party with a named or unique monster like a Demon Lord of the Abyss, just know it's probably not as balanced. That doesn't mean that it's going to steamroll them or be a cakewalk, just that they are almost always unbalanced versus the more standard method of assigning a challenge rating to a monster in the Monster Manual or Mordenkainen's, etc. Okay, with all of that said, I'm going to pick up the pace here for the final 6 levels as the choices, well, I mean, they're getting a little slimmer, I'm sure you guys can imagine. Moving on to CR16, there are 2 clear standouts: the Adult Silver Dragon and the Merilith Summoner variant, which ultimately came in just behind the dragon. Now, if you've never fought a standard Merilith, they are already one of those famous Dungeons and Dragons monsters akin to the Beholder, but they aren't invincible for a high-level group. When we add in a 50% chance to summon 1d3 Glabrazoos or a second Merilith to their side, however, you've suddenly turned a difficult but not impossible encounter into a very easily potentially party wiping one. But it's hard to go against a dragon that can breathe a cone paralyzing breath weapon. Additionally, what's key to point out here as a red flag for the Adult Silver Dragon is, unlike many of the condition bestowing attacks from all sorts of monsters in the game, once a PC manages to make their save from the dragon and break free from that paralyzation from the breath weapon, they do not become immune to it for the next 24 hours. So the dragon could simply breathe on them again. If a monster has the ability to stun lock the entire group into a TPK, that can easily be considered a campaign ender, and that's why the dragon takes the top spot for CR16. CR17 had some incredibly great monsters as well at the top, and surprisingly, it had the most non-named monsters to look at, with the Death Knight, the Dragon Turtle, the Frostworm, the Dracolich, the Androsphinx, and a few more. Our 3 strongest, however, were the Goristro, coming in at 3rd with its whopping 310 hit points, tons of resistances, advantage against spells, and its ability to knock someone down and then just annihilate them with damage. Then we had the Nagpa, which might seem like cheating because, I mean, they're sort of unique monsters, but not really. I mean, look, there's 13 of them and they don't have any names, so I'm just gonna count them for this video. Let's see. 23 intelligence as their caster mod with Feeble Mind, Prismatic Spray, Dominate Person, Disintegrate, and so on. And more than that. But ultimately, of course, we had to go with a winner, and our winner for this CR was the Adult Gold Dragon. I know, not a crazy out there pick, but again, like the Silver Dragon, there is just too much there compared with the other stat blocks at this point to not call it the strongest monster at CR17. Here's the deal. At this point, I'm not even sure this is really capable of a TPK on its own. If, and only if, and that's a big if the party is relatively appropriately leveled, it won't be a TPK. Their Fire Breath really only hits for 66 damage on average, and that really isn't that incredible against a level 12 or 13 character, especially even a whole group. Although the save DC of 21 for half is pretty decent. The Weakening Breath is interesting because at a strength save of 21, there's more than 50% chance for almost all the PCs at this point to fail, and unlike the dragon's Frightful Presence, the players, again, won't be immune, just like they wouldn't be with the Silver Dragon. But honestly, I don't see a lot of fights against this dragon really coming down to slugging it out with a barbarian. After the legendary resistances are gone for the day, higher level parties will probably spread out to avoid getting too many players in one breath attack and having the magic users just wear the thing down with good positioning for the fighter types to screen for the squishies. I mean, truly, I think the CR16 Silver Dragon is more lethal with its paralyzing breath, but CR17 still has to go to the Gold Dragon. With all that said, if your party is a bit under level, then that's an entirely different story. Getting 3 to 4 PCs in back-to-back breath attacks, yeah, that could definitely wipe the party. Certainly, it'd be far easier than it would be for the, say, the mighty Garistro. CR18 was actually pretty easy. Our sole runner-up was the Demi-Lich with a potentially instant TPK Howl and a bajillion immunities and resistances. The thing that most experienced DMs who have used this monster will tell you, though, is that they are just stupid squishy against Paladins. Also, while the Howl is incredible as it can recharge every turn on a 5 or 6, and in essence, it can just fly out of a Paladin's reach, screeching until the party is all at 0, the range is only 30 feet and the DC is just 15. Still though, the monster can TPK a group in one action if the dice decide to make it so, and that has to be respected. But the most deadly monster for CR18 is hands down, the summoner Amnesu. It gets Dominate Monster once a day and 3 Dominate Person spells while having reactions that can force players to attack their friends. Oh, and did I mention it can blind 2 players every single turn? Oh, and it has a natural AC of 21. Oh yeah, and it flies. Oh yeah, and it can summon devils to its aid and if you do decide to get it in melee. It deals an average of 77 damage between its 2 attacks, which, by the way, are at plus 11. Good gracious, this stat block is absurd. No wonder the game designers didn't give it legendary resistance. It'd be a freaking CR21 or higher if they did. Clearly a more deadly creature than even the infamous Demi-Lich. Okay, CR19, well, that's the Balor Summoner variant. It is. Is the Balor deadly? Yes. Add on the fact that it now has a 50% chance to summon not 1, but potentially 2 Meriliths to its side, and you have an encounter that most parties would just straight up need to run from. That's assuming the Balor hasn't already enslaved a few minions or even cultists running around it by this point. Also, there weren't a whole lot of CR19, so I'm just going to leave it at that. This one was pretty easy. CR20 kind of surprised me. My gut instinct was to look at both the Leviathan and the Matron Mother. But after digging into these stat blocks further and making some comparisons, the sad truth is that they both left me with the feeling of indifference. Neither are the spectacular all-star that I was expecting or, to be candid, kind of hoping for them to be. So instead, we're left with options that should be becoming familiar to us at this point. The Pit Fiend Summoner variant, which can summon another 153 hit point CR12 Devil to its side, and our top spot for CR20, the Ancient Brass Dragon. Now, I will add that just because the dragon is becoming predictable, that doesn't mean you should sleep on it. That, of course, is a little play on words for those in the know. And so finally, after countless stat blocks and hours, we've reached the end of our journey with CR21, and the only single monster that could be crowned champion for this level, the Lich. There isn't much to say about the Lich without saying it all. The Lich has an incredible list of spells, resistances, legendary actions, legendary resistances, layer actions, can return from destruction, and is considered to be a collector of magical oddities, and has a hearty intelligence score. Ever conniving and with an internal need to consume not just the body of someone to sustain its existence, like, a wolf or an animal, but literally their soul. The Lich is easily the strongest stat block a group of players will come up against and lords over this CR in a landslide. So, there we have it. After 2 videos, we've gone from CR 1/8 all the way to 21, and by now, you should have a good understanding of looking for red flags and game mechanics that have the chance to kill your PCs. What I found the most interesting about this exercise was just how uneven the individual levels were when compared to one another. Now, I have to ask, what did I miss? What monsters do you guys think should have been included here? Did you find it disappointing that the dragons were so well represented? I think taking 4 slots in this video. And do you think my analysis was fair for vampires? I really want to know your opinion over there. I, of course, want to give a massive shout out to all of my amazing patrons over at welcomeadventures.com. Guys, thank you so much. Times have been very difficult for me and my family, and it's because of you that I was able to get by this month. And for that, I'm just so grateful. Thank you guys so much for that support. If you guys like what I do here and you want to support more content while snagging up some rewards for yourself, head over to welcomeadventures.com. We have a fantastic tier at just $2.50 a month that you guys pick up 2 maps currently that are being produced by David Hemingway, who is an absolutely phenomenal artist. This month we got the Frontier Outpost, which you guys voted on last month, and our bonus map was the Frozen Ascent map. So if you guys are patrons, make sure you log in and snag those maps, download them. They come in hex and plain and gridded, all 3 variants for you. So whatever platform you're on, however you want to use them, yeah, there's a lot of flexibility there. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I would love to have you subscribe. I put out videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and videos just like this. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below and come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.